Good morning. Like Agnes said, my name is Dan Dillner. I'm a protection forester. I work out of the northwest portion of the state for Forest Parks and Recreation, so same department, just the forestry division. And today I'm going to cover some of the things that can ruin your camping trip or ruin your summer working for Vermont State Park. So we're going to talk about poison ivy, ticks, hazard trees, emerald ash borer, and firewood that would be coming into your park. So this presentation, I had some assistance with Rob for the presentation, Rob Peterson, and he coined the term, the great outdoors. So that's sort of all the things that are going to make your summer hard. If not, it'll make paperwork or maybe electronic paperwork nowadays. All right, so these are the protection foresters that cover the different areas of the state. And like I mentioned, I cover Region 3 parks. And down in Region 4, contact your supervisor to find out which forester covers your park. But in general, Emily Meacham, who works out of the St. Johnsbury office, covers the more northwestern or more northeastern portion of the parks in that region, and John Cherico, the more central ones. But we're the folks that are out there that spray poison ivy, that mark the hazard trees, that can assist you in identifying invasive insects, and we're the ones to contact if you have firewood coming into the park that needs to be dealt with. I'll put these contacts up again at the end of the presentation, but feel free to jot them down or take a picture of the screen or something like that. Send questions to us at any time. Reach out to your protection forester. I'm happy if you want to contact me with any questions. I get from parks all over the state. I get weird pictures texted to me of plants and want to know if it's poison ivy and on a Sunday or whatever. It doesn't matter. Be happy to help you out. Those are the things that we're going to go over in this little presentation to help you, but at the end, these are some of the things I'd like you to know, is to be able to identify poison ivy, at least, to some extent. We're going to go over that specifically and how it's a variable looking plant, but to be able to identify poison ivy, learn some ways to protect yourselves from ticks, be able to identify some of the common hazards in trees that will make them dangerous and that may need to come down. Be able to recognize some of the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer, and to know the FPR policy for firewood coming into parks. So those are the 5 things. And like I said before, I'm going to stop after each section and take questions. So as we're going through, feel free to put questions in the chat. And if there's time, we'll go over all the questions. If not, then you may have to send some of them to me, or I can answer them afterwards. Okay, so poison ivy, the first one. The first thing to think about with poison ivy is how it's a plant that looks very different. Every leaf is different. For just in this one little picture here, we've got a poison ivy leaf that looks like a heart. We've got some that are round, some that have more scalloped edges. Some look like ivy. They have a really variable form, but the things I look for identifying poison ivy is, one, it's a woody plant, so it's not an annual that's going to die off each year. The leaves will fall off like a tree, but the stem will remain intact. In this particular picture, it's a vine going up a tree, but it can be a shrub, it can be a little bush, it can be a really large vine going way up in a tree with branches coming off the side laterally. I've seen it in lawns where it's literally only an inch high and growing in the grass and gets mowed and still continues to live. So, but the main thing I look for is thicker leaves, more like a tree, and you've heard of the leaves of 3, of course, but lots of plants have leaves of 3. So the center petiole here is extended, so that's one of the things I always look for, and then these veins in the leaf that are really nice and parallel. So it's typically a shiny leaf. If it's growing in the shade, the leaves can be really dark, like an evergreen. If it's growing more in the sun, they might be greener. But we'll take a look at some of the different ways, different forms. They do produce berries and fruit, and believe it or not, birds eat these. Most mammals, other than primates, are immune to poison ivy. So the birds eat them. The seeds are less than a 1/4 inch in diameter and can be a pretty large group on top of the poison ivy plant. So they're white, and when they're ripe, and they can the birds can eat them and then fly around and drop the seeds and spread poison ivy. Poison ivy loves to grow in disturbed areas, so if you're a park that has a fair amount of poison ivy, you decide you want to clear out by a road or open an area for a bench, just keep in mind that it's likely that it'll be a nice little spot for poison ivy to come in. So looking at some plants here, this is kind of a good picture. It shows you multiple plants in one photo. The first one is not poison ivy. This is called hog pina. I've had lots of parks contact me and say they need spraying and they got poison ivy, got it all marked off. Turns out it's this little vine. It's a legume. It's not really edible, but it's not poison ivy. Dies back each season and it grows back from a seed. So it's thin, real thin, light leaves. It does have that center petiole. It's longer, but it's not poison ivy. It's not poisonous at all. The other one that's kind of a look-alike, just because the leaves look similar and it almost always grows right with poison ivy, is Virginia creeper. But it does have 5 leaves together. But again, those darker leaves, but they tend to grow like right with each other all the time for some reason. So here's, if you hadn't noticed it, this is poison ivy here. That center petiole longer, 3 in a group. All right, so here's a little quiz. We're going to go over some of these different plants. So take a moment to look at each one, see if you can pick out which one or more of these pictures are poison ivy. So start in the top left here. This is that Virginia creeper again. Sometimes looks a little bit like poison ivy, but that's one there. If you go to the next one, this is poison ivy. In the fall foliage, poison ivy can have some beautiful red foliage. I don't know if you've ever been up along the coast of Maine, you can see some really beautiful red poison ivy in the rocks. But as it starts to turn color, this may be later in September where things are starting to dry out. It's a drought season maybe. You'll get some of this browning along the edges. Not the best time to control the plant, but still possible if you have enough green foliage. All right, the one in the bottom left is actually poison ivy as well. This is what it looks like early in the spring when it's first coming out. Nice and juicy, a lot of good oils in there to harm you. So, it looks like fresh growing. That's not quite the time to control it, but it's certainly a time where you could get into it. So be careful when it looks like that, especially. And then the last one is not poison ivy. This is called wild star sarsaparilla. Actually, you could make a beverage from the root. It's pretty common under pines in areas where there's not a lot of other plant growth in acidic soils. But so sometimes this is look-alike. It's sort of these leaves, the group of 3, but in the end they have multiple leaves on the end. So 3 leaves here with 2 off the side, so there's 5 total. Not poison ivy, but sometimes confused. All right, so another quiz, some more plants here. Take a look at the 4 pictures and see if you can pick out which ones are poison ivy and which ones are not. So if you look at the top left here, this is kind of a good example of poison ivy. If you look at, there's a fence here. So the poison ivy, it's growing on the other side of the fence, but it loves light. So it's seeking light. It's poking through the fence and coming out to grab a passerby and get some sunlight. But look at these leaves here compared to the other ones we saw. More elliptical, long, skinny leaves, sort of larger. Like I said, they're always variable. And the next one here is that Virginia creeper again. So just keep showing that because people often confuse it. Down at the bottom, again, that hog peanut looks, to me it doesn't look similar at all, but if you're not used to looking at them, it might. But see how you can't really see the veins at all in this leaf? That's a good telltale sign. And the last one is a common weed, not poison ivy, sometimes known as the devil's lettuce, but we'll continue on. All right, so poison ivy is, we have a control program in the parks. It's not an eradication program. It's in areas where poison ivy is prevalent, it's virtually impossible to get rid of all of it unless there's just a tiny little patch. So it's a control program that we have to do every year, maybe not each park every year, but what we need from you as park managers is assistance and following the rules. So controlling poison ivy, we use glyphosate. So it is a pesticide, and by law you need to follow the label of a pesticide. And one of the things you need to do is to keep people out of the area when you're spraying. So you need to post notices, and communication with the protection forester is really key, so we can let you know when we're coming in. And honestly, it may be short notice. we need to control poison ivy, but we have a lot of other things to do as well. And the weather needs to be just right. It can't be rainy. It needs to be a good dry day without too much wind and not a lot of visitors. So that window isn't very big. And so we may give you fairly short notice that, hey, we've got, a couple hours today to come in your park. We're going to be in the area and we can hit some poison ivy. So kind of be ready for that, and we'll do our best. But posting notes, so maybe get some notices printed up ahead of time that you can hang so visitors, put them on the bulletin boards at the contact station. You don't want to freak people out, but people need to know that there is some control going on in the parks. What I really love to do is if I can have a park staff accompany me when I'm spraying, especially if they can be in their uniform so they can talk to visitors. I have parks with a lot of poison ivy, so I'll be wearing typically a respirator and a Tyvek suit and the backpack sprayer. We don't spray from vehicles like in the photo. That's something I've done in the past, but it's important to have someone that can reach out to visitors. Occasionally people are upset about this. Most of the time they're pretty happy that we're there to spray poison ivy. So again, it's a control program. Like, in my parks, what I would tend to do is go maybe the 10 feet around the outside edge of the edge of the campsite, just to keep it so it's not growing in a place where kids aren't going to be, coming in contact with it. But so having someone, with me is helpful, so they can communicate with park visitors and let them know what's going on. So if it makes sense, we can try to rope off the area to keep people from re-entering. But the re-entry for this, the product that we're spraying is once it's dry. So if you do it on a good dry day, it could be dry on the plant in 15 or 20 minutes. So it doesn't take a long time. The key is to try to do it when there's not a lot of visitors there. So if possible, letting us know before June 1st, June is really the best time to hit it. Obviously during the week in June, it's a lot less busy. In many parks, there'll be no visitors during the week in June. It'd be a perfect time to go out there. The plant's growing vigorously. It's the best time to control it. So we hit the foliage and then it gets sucked down in the roots and takes about a week or two for it to die. So making a park map is really important. It's much more efficient for us. If I pull into a large park and I have to go look for poison ivy, it's going to take hours. And it'd be way quicker if you, as you're cleaning campsites and preparing for the season, that you have a little map made so you can just hand it to me or you can email it to me and I can be ready to go. A larger park like Grand Isle, I love to have a park staff if possible to drive me around so I can stay suited up, sit on the back of the truck, and I can go and just hit all the little spots. Smaller parks, it's probably not necessary, but having the map made is really key. And we may not go in every park every year. Sometimes I go in, a few parks one year and then next year a few other parks. So some of the parks in the more mountainous areas, Northeast Kingdom, you probably don't have any poison ivy, but it is pretty common in a lot of the areas. So letting us know by June 1st if possible. If not, I may skip, July and August when it's busy and then maybe get it at the end of the season. All right, so last picture of poison ivy here. This looks a lot more like a vine. It's a little different than the other pictures. But here I'll take any questions if there are any. Any questions in the chat, Agnes?
No, we're looking good. There was one question what's the % of the population that is not affected by poison ivy? Do you happen to know the answer to that one?
I do not know the answer. I'm going to suggest that if you don't know, it's probably not the summer working for state parks is maybe not the best time to test that. Maybe on your own time would be good to test that. But I've known people that claim they were immune and they tested it and then they actually weren't. So I personally have never gotten poison ivy, but I'm extremely careful. So I would just recommend maybe checking that on your own time, but I don't know. Agnes is cracking up. Okay. You're distracting me, Agnes. You're going to have to turn off your camera.
I'm sorry, Dan. Every time. Okay, right.
All right, so continuing on. Now, I'll preface this next section on ticks is that I am not a tick expert in any way, shape, or form. I'm not an entomologist, even though ticks are not insects, but I'm not a healthcare professional, so I'll give you some information based on what I've learned, based on some experience and some getting information from the Vermont Department of Health. But please, if you have specific concerns about your health, make sure you reach out to your healthcare provider. And There's lots of good information out there, and I'll give you some resources where you can find this, but I'm really not a professional. I'm just going to give you a few tips. The main thing that we're concerned about with ticks is disease. Some ticks really transmit disease, others not so much. And really, Lyme disease is the biggest one we're mostly concerned about in Vermont. There are dozens of diseases that ticks can give you, but in Vermont, the biggest one is Lyme disease. And I think this map kind of just illustrates, since, even though it's 3 years old, the cases throughout the Northeast. It's interesting to note, I noticed this morning, is that Massachusetts has no cases in this map virtually, and I think that must be some sort of a data error, but because I know there's plenty of Lyme disease in Massachusetts. But so we're certainly not immune. It used to be a thing down in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Vermont's got plenty of Lyme disease, plenty of ticks, unfortunately. I grew up in Vermont. When I was a kid, we never even heard of ticks. So it's a newer thing, but it's something you need to be aware of. And there's no portion of the state now that is really immune to ticks. A few years ago, we would have said, mountainous areas, not so likely, but, I picked them up all over. So we'll talk a little bit about them and how to protect yourself. This just kind of just shows you, some of the worst areas in the state. Certainly, if you're in some of those darker counties, you're going to need to be more careful, but I think we need to be careful all the time. And complacency is, not paying attention is where you're going to get injured from ticks. So definitely take the time to follow and take care of yourself. If a lot of the foresters feel like it's just a matter of time before we get Lyme disease, but we're not hiding in our house either. So we do things to protect ourselves, and you can too. And I think if you do, you're going to be very unlikely to get sick. It's really two tick species in Vermont that are most commonly seen, and we're really going to spend our time mostly on one of them. But this is gross. Ticks are nasty, and this is the American dog tick, sometimes called the wood tick. It's a really common tick, especially, and it seems real prevalent in the Northeast Kingdom, Groton area. Thankfully, it doesn't really transmit, for all practical purposes, it doesn't transmit disease. But you're going to see it's really common, and it's kind of a fast-moving tick. I noticed that it crawls along a lot faster than deer ticks. But it has, the thing about it, it's bigger, and it has these reddish-orange legs. So it loves to get on the back of your neck. I think I've always gotten them on me, like crawling. I felt them crawling in the back of my neck, based by my hair and ears. So they love to hitchhike on you. So that's a common tick that you're going to see. But the one we're really most concerned about in Vermont is the black-legged tick, which is really the proper name for it. People always call it the deer tick. But black-legged tick is really probably a better name because of those black legs. It's a good identifying feature. The problem with ticks, especially deer ticks, is they really are size variable. So we'll kind of show you some of the different life stages of them, but they can be really tiny. And those of you like me now that need glasses to see small things, you're not going to see some of these smaller life stages of these ticks. The one down in the bottom right here, this is a fully engorged female, so they can get to be the size of a small grape or a raisin, which is pretty nasty. But this one here is questing on some vegetation, waiting for something to come by. Ticks don't fly, they don't jump, but they tend to get on you, and most commonly would be on your pant legs would be the most common place. So we need to figure out some ways to help protect ourselves. This kind of just shows you the various life stages. So the smallest stage here is the larval stage, which thankfully does not transmit disease because they have not had a blood meal yet. And then the next stage is the nymph. So these are about the size of a poppy seed, and then we have the sesame seed. This is the male, female a little bit larger. But they have black legs, but even in this picture they aren't that black looking. So life cycle is actually a little bit complicated. It's a 2-year life cycle. So just go over it briefly to help you so you can think about what times of the year to protect yourself. It's small. If you go to the Vermont Department of Health, you can see a larger picture of it. But I'll just sort of start in the middle here. So it's spring. You're out and about getting ready to start the parks. So there's eggs that were laid. Eggs are laid in the spring. So they hatch out as weather warms up. And that's where those larvae, the smallest phase, are out. So the larvae are out, and they're looking for their first blood meal. And they're typically going to get on, small rodents and birds. Believe it or not, birds are actually a pretty big host for those larvae. And like I said, they're not infected yet because they haven't had a blood meal.
Dan,
So
I've got a,
go
sorry,
ahead.
I have a question that came up. How long does it take for a tick to become engorged after attaching itself?
I do not know the answer to that, but I don't. It's not very long.
Okay.
Even in 24 hours, they can double in size. So maybe 24, 36 hours, they can be pretty engorged, from my experience. But I don't know. If I guess we'll just maybe hold questions till the end of the little talk. It'd be quicker. Um, so they're picking up their blood meal, and then throughout the summer, they're growing, and they are the larvae are growing through the summer, and then in the fall, and then they overwinter under the leaf litter in the fall. So if we have a winter with very little snow cover and really good hard freezes, they actually can cause some damage to ticks and kill them. So this year we had some decent snow cover, even though it wasn't a very cold winter. We had decent snow cover, probably the ticks did pretty well. Unfortunately, anecdotally, I feel like it's going to be a bad tick year this year because we had tremendous amount of rodents last year in response to a heavy seed and nut year the year before. Last year, I don't know if you were out and about, but it was like an infestation of chipmunks. So I'm suspecting this year is going to be a pretty bad tick year. So just be prepared for that. So then they overwinter and they come out as a nymph in the spring, and that's where we really need to be mostly concerned. So now they could potentially have pathogens in them, and they're looking for a host: deer, small mammals, chipmunks. Chipmunks are a really big host for ticks, actually, and then of course us. So going out through the summer, that's where they're staying for their host, trying to get the blood meal. If they don't get a blood meal in the summertime, when they come out as adults, they're going to look for another blood meal in the fall if possible, so they can lay their eggs. They overwinter under the leaf litter, and then in the spring they'll lay their eggs. So the time you're most likely to pick up ticks is going to be the spring throughout the summer. But looking at this next picture, for getting Lyme disease is most prevalent, probably in those later nymph stages, and the adults are going to be giving Lyme disease throughout the summer months. So just things to think about. So what can you do about it? Well, there are some things you can do, and the Vermont Department of Health has come up with this program called Beat Tick Smart, which is protect, check, remove, and watch. So if you follow these steps, you will be a lot safer. So first, could you maybe potentially avoid some areas where ticks live? You might be able to do that based on habitat, but looking at the map of the United States, probably not going to be able to avoid everywhere they live. But some of the places the ticks like to live are brushy areas. They love invasives for some reason. There's a good correlation between things like honeysuckle and barberry, places where rodents like to hide out. Basically, if it's good habitat for animals, it's probably pretty good for ticks. So brushy areas, tall grass, places like that. They love limestone soils, where places that promote plants that produce a lot of nuts and fruits and berries. So obviously, you can't avoid that when you're working in the parks and you see litter. You're probably going to need to go off the edge of the site to pick it up. But maybe you can do some things to cover yourself up. So if possible, you want to make sure to keep it so your clothes are a barrier, so ticks can't get in and go under pant legs, under your shirt, and get to your skin. So tucking your shirt in, tucking your socks into your pant legs so you look like a weirdo, is a good way to keep ticks from crawling in. Those in that picture there's some tick gaiters, so just a simple band around your leg to keep ticks from going in. I like to use LL Bean boots to tuck my pant legs in, tie them up nice and tight, treat my boots, treat my pants. We'll talk more about treating in a minute here. But using the tick repellent, and that's just a really good way. So if you've stopped entry under your clothing by having barriers, and now having clothing the ticks don't like and actually can kill them. So permethrin, the parks will provide permethrin spray for you to treat your clothing as long as you use it correctly. So it's not to be applied on your skin. Like any pesticide, the label is the law. So read the label on the back of the can, how to apply it. But basically, you want to have the clothes hanging up outside on a good day where it's nice and dry, not a lot of wind. Make sure you're not going to be downwind of where you're spraying, and really soak the garment. You can get several items of clothing treated from a can, but really put the spray right to the garment outside where it can dry good, and then don't put it on until it's dry. this can be very, very effective in keeping ticks away. I've literally watched ticks on my clothing that was treated to like their legs quiver and they fall off. They do not do well at all with this permethrin. But again, this is not for your skin. If you want to put something on your skin, DEET or something like that will work. I typically don't put anything on my skin. I treat my clothing. I put it on when I go out in the field, out to do work, and then I take it off. When you take it off, if you think you've been in areas or there's any chance you may have ticks, it's a great idea to put the clothes in the dryer to kill the ticks, or maybe put them in a plastic bag. So it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of work to do all this properly, but it's better than getting Lyme disease. I'm sure everybody here knows someone that's had Lyme disease, and it can be a life-changing event. So not for the good. So you've done what you can to protect yourself, but then the next really most important thing is to check. So if you check yourself thoroughly every single day, then it's going to be less than 24 hours that the ticks could have attached. So checking again. Don't let ticks get inside your clothing. Check your whole body for ticks. Check everywhere, every crack and crevice. They love to go underneath waistbands of your underwear, on your sides, behind your ears, back of your neck. I most commonly have found them on around my waist. That's really where they like to be. So a spot where they can get under, and feel like they're protected. And very likely you won't feel deer ticks crawling on your skin. They're so small and so light that you're very unlikely to see them, to feel them. So checking, taking a shower each day after work, to make sure that you can check yourself carefully. And a flashlight's a great way to help check yourself. If you're unlucky enough to have a tick attach, it's our department policy that if you find a tick that's been attached on you and you feel like you got it during work time, then you need to fill out a first report of injury. And I'm sure you learned how to do that. I think it's probably all online now. But that way, if in case it turns into more of a health issue, that way you can be covered by workers' compensation. But the best thing to do is get the tick off you quickly. And there's lots of ways that people have talked about doing this, and there's really only a couple good ways. The old wives' tales of burning match heads and putting nail polish on it or paint thinner or something like that is really not a good practice. And in fact, it may potentially cause ticks to regurgitate pathogens into your body. So when you remove them, you want to use something like a pair of really sharp tweezers, or there's some tick removal kits that you can get, and some little scoops and things. I find sharp tweezers to be about the easiest thing, but they're not easy to remove. Unfortunately, the mouth parts have these little barbs that go backwards like fish hooks, so when you pull them, they will tend to pull your skin up. So pull slow and steady. Unfortunately, half the time the mouth parts will break off in your skin. Don't be worried. It's not the end of the world. It happens a lot. You're not going to get Lyme disease any more than if they hadn't broken off. It's gross, but clean the area with soap and water, maybe disinfect it with some alcohol or something. But keep the tick if you're worried about it. Maybe put it in a Ziploc bag in the freezer. That usually will kill them. Or put them in a vial with some alcohol if you have them. And then if you feel like it's possible it's been on long enough, then more than 24 hours is sort of the rule. But if you're worried it looked like it had gotten engorged at all, you should probably talk to your doctor, and they may recommend some a preemptive dose of some antibiotic. So once you've had a tick attached, then you really want to watch for symptoms. Make sure that you are not getting Lyme disease. There's that rash down in the bottom. It talks about that bullseye rash. That's a great sign, but it's not that. It doesn't always happen. So a lot of times people get ticks. They get tick diseases, and they have no idea that they never saw the tick. Especially if you had one of those nymphs, and your eyesight isn't as good, you're probably not going to see them. So, watching out for all those different things that can, many of us have a lot of those symptoms every day. So you can't be a hypochondriac about it, but you just got to pay attention if you think you've had a tick, to think about keeping yourself safe. And again, contact your healthcare provider. This is a great resource, this tick management handbook. It's a little bit old now, but it has if you want to read more about all the nasties that it can get you, it talks about pretty much every species of tick in North America and all the horrible diseases that you can get. But if you want to educate yourself, it is a very good resource. It's online. Just Google Tick Management Handbook. It's from the state of Connecticut, puts that out, their extension service. And then, so questions on ticks.
So there was the engorged question, and then there's some beautiful photos of ticks that got posted that are quite cringy. But right now I'm not seeing too much question wise. One was, will you feel it when it latches on? Also really wondering if that guy that was near the spraying of the permethrin was downwind. Important question.
Certainly not.
And then, are there Lone Star ticks in Vermont? Is a question.
I don't know for sure, but I seem like I recall that they have been found occasionally, but not that common. So, but I don't know for sure on that answer. Like I said, I'm not really an expert on ticks.
Okay. And are there any real telltale signs as to how to tell the difference between dog, deer, ticks when engorged?
It's not easy when they're engorged. You can go online and, you might even need a microscope if you're not familiar, but there's some anal glands that you look at. There's these funny little holes underneath. So it is possible. If you're really concerned about it, there is a entomologist with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and she is doing a tick study. So I can maybe put that in the chat afterwards, her contact information. She's collecting ticks from around the state and keeping track of their various things. She has a lot of good information about ticks as well.
Okay, cool. That's the majority of it. There's some interesting, those were the big ones. People are talking about some things that have happened to them before. And yes, we can provide permethrin. If folks are interested in it, we can get it out to park staff. And as Dan said, don't apply it right to your skin. Make sure to read the label.
Yeah, and if you use the permethrin, I can't remember, but it's good for a certain number of washes, maybe 5 or 10 washes. If you bought a garment from Insect Shield, it's expensive, but they're good for like 75 washes. Or you can, if you wanted to, mail your clothing to get treated by Insect Shield, and then they'll put a tag in it that says that it's treated. But the easiest thing probably for you, and since the state's paying for it, to just use the cans. But I would certainly apply it multiple times in the summer. And maybe you don't need to wash your work pants every single day. Maybe if you're treating them, you could not wash them as often, just so that way they stay treated better. Yeah. All right, we'll move on. How are we doing on time here?
We've got you've got about 10 minutes left, 12 minutes.
Well, we are late starting, so we still got a lot more to cover here. We'll have to see. Okay. All right, so hazard trees, then we'll move on. So, how to maybe prevent this in your park. A hazard tree is something that has a target. So it's a tree with a defect in it, but it has to have a target. So if it's a dead tree standing out in the forest, it may be hazardous when you go sit under it, but before that, it's really not a hazard. So we're looking at trees that could potentially cause injury to visitors by us attracting them to that part of the park. And then now there's a tree that could potentially cause harm. So some things that you might want to look for when you're out there. But first preface this, the protection foresters have already marked hazard trees and they've been removed by the time you get there, or they will be removed soon after from last fall. But things happen over the winter. Heavy snow loads, ice, all that kind of stuff. So stress cracks, something that's probably most commonly seen on trees that are on the edge. So trees that are out looking out over an opening, they may get a heavy snow load or an ice load, and then they may get these cracks in them and they may have to come down. So look for things like that. Woodpeckers are a great way to help identify any signs of decay. So if the internal portion of the tree is compromised from a fungus and it's got insect activity in there, woodpeckers may be opening things up, and we maybe missed it when we were marking hazard trees. So if you see a lot of woodpecker activity, then that might be a sign that there's some decay and or fungal, fruiting bodies from a fungus, mushrooms coming out the side of the tree. That's also a good indication that there is problems internally. Overhead hazards, things have broken off in storms. hanging dead branches, those would probably need to be removed if there's a target underneath. Some of them could be easily removed just by cutting the whole tree. If it's a small tree, if it's a large tree, maybe worth having a tree service come in. It might also be something you could reach with a pole pruner. So, certainly take a look up when you're cleaning and working out in the parks. Look up as well as around. Dead limbs overhead. If you can't worry about every tiny little dead branch, but if it's something that looks like it has the potential where if it fell, it would put a hole in someone's car or someone's head, it may be something that needs to be removed. And certain species tend to have more dead branches than others, but if there's a lot of dead branches, then maybe the tree needs to come down. Root problems, sprung roots. So you get a tree that's leaning, the roots are moving up and down in the wind. That indicates that there's some kind of problem and the tree is no longer connected well to the ground, and it probably needs to come down. So other root problems, if you see fungus coming out at the base of the tree, that's a good indication that the roots are compromised and the tree also may need to be removed. Those kind of trees are not going to survive well in a windstorm. And I always tell people there's a storm out there that'll take down any tree, but we're looking for trees that are compromised and they're a little out of the ordinary and we can say, hey, they have defects. So if someone gets injured or someone's property gets damaged and they try to sue us, we can demonstrate that, hey, we've done everything we could do to try to keep you safe. That it was a storm that we can control and things happen, but if the tree that comes down is all completely rotten inside, then I feel like we may have some liability there. Summer storms, even though we've done the hazard trees, there still might be some summer storms that cause damage, and you may have to get some trees to be removed in the summertime. It's been a myth sometimes in the past that the protection foresters need to give permission to have trees cut down, and that is not true. We will mark hazard trees. We'll come in anytime and give you, help the maintenance technician decide if something needs to come down or not. But if it's obvious damaged tree, we don't need our permission to cut it. Other things like in that tree over in the left side here, this is from bad branching from a small tree. So over time, the two sections have been growing apart and pushing away from each other, and that's going to be likely to split during a storm. And here more fungus inside of a tree. Doesn't mean that this tree necessarily has to come down, but if it's a tree, it's a really big tree, it may have plenty of wood to keep it alive. But if it's that many, just because you see one mushroom doesn't mean the tree is necessarily dead. Then, animals out there can cause damage, whether it's with teeth or hatchets. So those kind of trees may need to be taken down as summer progresses. So it sounds like you better kind of skip the questions and keep moving. But again, send me a message if you have questions. All right, so segue into emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer helps create hazard trees. That's kind of why we talk about it in the parks, especially. And at the end, we'll talk about how many ash trees are actually in the parks that could be hazard trees. But so this is a nasty little green bug. It's actually quite pretty, but it's unfortunately moving around the state. And these are some things that you could look for to find out if it's in your park. Woodpeckers are a great way to help us identify this insect. Woodpecker. So the insect, the adult lays their eggs in the cracks in the bark, and the larvae, they hatch, they burrow down, live underneath the bark. They don't burrow in the wood, they're just under the bark. So woodpeckers love to eat the larvae, and they're going to start what we call flecking. So in the beginning, it might look like this, and then later on, you're going to see this huge sections of ashes just stripped off and look kind of orangish. This is a good telltale sign if it's an ash tree that it's emerald ash borer. You might see, tops dying back and some of this tufting of branches showing a stressed tree. Could be caused by multiple things, but if it's ash, you might want to suspect that it is emerald ash borer. D-shaped holes. So when the adults are exiting, they leave these D-shaped holes, but honestly, they're like 1/8 of an inch in diameter. So you're kind of unlikely to see these holes unless the tree is really infested, but that is a sign that we would look for. So in other words, if you're seeing a lot of big round holes, it's probably not emerald ash borer. So lots of stuff in the news about how it's now in Vermont, and this just kind of shows you where it is in Vermont. We call this the fried egg map. Just kind of shows you the center of where it's actually been been actually confirmed infestation, and then these are the areas around that we assume that's infested, but maybe hasn't actually been confirmed. So the question is how much ash in Vermont State Park? So we did a survey a few years ago, and we counted almost 16,000 ash in Vermont state parks that are, if they're dead, they would be a hazard tree. So that's why we need to care about emerald ash borer and potentially keep it out of the parks as long as we can. Obviously, it's coming whether we want it to or not, but there's some ways we can help prevent it, and one is firewood, which is what we're going to talk about next. But just kind of briefly shows you where emerald ash borer is in the United States. And if you want to read about it, which I encourage you as a park manager, you really should be somewhat educated on questions that might arise from invasive insects. So take a minute to go to vtinvasives.com and read about all kinds of stuff, but there is a pretty good section on emerald ash borer and the latest maps there. So again, we'll probably skip the questions to the end. And again, that bark flecking on an ash. All right, so the last section is firewood and what you're going to do about it. So if you go to our Forest and Parks website, you can read about the firewood quarantine. It's actual law that we're not allowed to bring untreated firewood in from out of state. So that's an important thing to understand. As well as we have these slow the spread recommendations, which are to try to prevent ash coming into the state, or ash coming in state or being transported around during the flight season that could potentially move emerald ash borer. But that's a lot of things for park staff to try to figure out. So if you've got firewood coming in, you'd have to decide whether it's coming from out of state, whether is it really ash, is it the flight season, all these things. So we've pretty much, our department has decided that no firewood comes into Vermont State Parks unless it's been treated. So this picture on the right just shows some firewood that came in. It was confiscated, I think, from Grand Isle years ago, but it was in a bag. It came from Idaho. So people do move stuff around, especially in RVs, and we want to try to prevent that. So unless the firewood comes in and it has been labeled with this label from APHIS, or USDA APHIS PPQ, it's this little shield on here that says that it's been heat treated and certified, then it's not going to come into the park. So what happens if someone shows up with a load of firewood in the park? Well, as a park manager, you're allowed to let folks burn a small quantity that they can on the first night, if that's feasible. If it's someone coming in and it's a really big park, it may not be feasible for you to keep track on whether that firewood was really burned or not the first day. So that's up to you if you think you can handle that. Some parks decide if it comes in, they just take it. But we are still exchanging it. So that is, it does make it so folks aren't quite so angry. It is a lot of work. If someone comes in with a full truckload, we want you to double bag the firewood, but one option if they come in with a whole load and you're going to take it away is maybe get a tarp and wrap the whole pile up so that when you've got time, you can properly bag each one up. I mean, obviously, when there's a line at the contact station, I understand it's not going to be feasible to be bagging tons of wood, but keeping track of it is important. We don't want the wood to be left on the campsite or where insects can emerge, and there's other things besides emerald ash borer coming out of that wood. So double bag the firewood, put a tag, we'll provide tags for you from your protection forester, special bags that are super heavy 6 mil bags. They hold about an arm load. Please don't overload them because it's hard for us to move them around. So you put the wood in the bag, you put the tag between and the second bag, and use a zip tie on there, which will provide. If you can keep them under cover, that's great because it's a lot less nasty than if they're all soaked and outside, but do the best you can. And please contact your protection forester right away saying you've got firewood that needs to be picked up. Probably email is the easiest way, but you're more than welcome to text or email us, or call us. So I think that's it. So are there more questions that we have time for, Agnes?
Yeah, I think we can ask a couple of quick questions.
Okay.
One question that I have is a clarifying question. Am I correct in thinking that last year, and stop me if I'm wrong, there was a bag that somebody had confiscated but didn't put a tag in it, and it did have an EAB infestation? Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, so it was an infested piece of ash. It did have emerald ash borer signs and symptoms in it. I'm not sure if they actually recovered an insect, but it wasn't, a piece of wood. And yeah, it didn't have a tag, so we don't really know where it came from. And I understand sometimes you may not get tags in there, but do the best you can. It's not perfect. You can't, we can't worry about every tiny little piece of wood coming in. We try. I understand you have to be realistic, but do the best you can, please. And it's important. But yes, there was a prevented infestation possibly in one of the parks last year by collecting this. So that is important. And again, here's our contact information. And it is a burden to collect this firewood. I totally wish there was a different way. But this is the plan, like it or not. So.
Yep. And then the next question is, are we putting EAB traps in parks?
We are putting some purple traps out. So I'm not sure if where of all the locations yet, but there will be some potentially some trap trees again. And I think I know there's some purple traps out going to be set out, and I would have guessed some of them will be in parks for sure.
Okay. And then another question is, just to confirm, each park can choose if we honor the one-night burning policy?
That's a policy that's allowed, and I'm not sure if you can decide to honor or not honor. Maybe check with your supervisor on that. But I think to me, it makes sense in my mind that if you think that your park is so busy, there's no way you can possibly keep track of that, then you probably would want to confiscate it. But maybe check with the park manager on that specific thing. But the rule is that we're taking firewood that's not heat treated, but generously exchanging and then allowing parks staff to allow the customer to burn one night what they can burn up in one night. I mean, because if everybody came in with their armload of wood and they from anywhere and burned it up right away, really wouldn't be a problem. It's the fact that it gets left lying around or transferred or thrown out in the woods or half burned, and then the insects can get out. So I think I think it's fair to let people do the one night thing if you think you can control it.
Yep. All right. And then last question, do you know what species of woodpecker does the flecking like that?
I think they all do. I think, but in Vermont, probably, I'm guessing it's the Downies and Harrys that are probably really doing the most of it.
Okay.
Pileators tend to do more like really, excavations, but I think it's really the Harrys that are the biggest ones.
Okay.
But I'm not positive.
Okay. I think that's it for questions that seem to be pertinent. Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you so much, Dan.
You're welcome. So should I stop the recording then?
Yeah, we're good to go. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Dan.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.